throughout the year that actually I think you worked still with Shaun Tan's novel. And before you give us a short presentation of what you did during this year, I will introduce you. So Bidisha Banerjee is an associate professor in the Department of Literature and Cultural Studies, and she is the director of the Center for Popular Culture in the Humanities at the Education University of Hong Kong. Her research interests include post-colonial and migration studies, photography studies, graphic narratives, and South Asian diasporic fiction. Her work appeared in journals like the Commonwealth Literature Journal, Journal of Post-Colonial Writing, Visual Studies, and Journal of Graphic Novels and Comics. And the current book project attempts to study the narrated image in post-colonial literature, which functions as photographic metaphor to enhance the themes of the literary text. And you also directed the first Hong Kong's ever One City, One Book project in 2019. So again, welcome, and the floor is yours.
Thank you so much, Jerry, for this very kind introduction. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen. Yes, I'm very pleased and very grateful to have this opportunity to talk about the One City, One Book project that I directed. Can you all see my slides? Okay, yeah, all right. So as Jerry said, we we had this a year-long event that I'm gonna very briefly, it's difficult to talk about something that went on for a year in a short time. So I have a lot of photographs from our different events and just sort of a very brief summary today. Yeah, we had to cancel, unfortunately, the kind of concluding event, which was this conference that was, fully planned and scheduled to go ahead. So you're probably all familiar with the kind of One City, One Book program, also called the Big Read program, very popular in America and also in a number of European cities. So it's basically a community reading program which encourages as many people as possible in a city to read and discuss a single book at the same time. And that time period can be a very short period of maybe 2 weeks when there are a lot of activities and everybody's engaging with the book and talking about it, or it can be, a few months, or as it was in our case, it can be a whole year. So a series of activities related to the book are held, including talks and panel discussions, exhibitions, film screenings, museum events, school events, book discussions, an author visit if possible, cultural performances, all sorts of things like that. And the goals of the initiative are generally to promote reading and to build a sense of community. So there are long-running programs in Dublin, London, and New York, and many other cities. Dublin, they do kind of Dublin writers. Dublin, of course, has a very long, rich tradition of literature. So they're very lucky to have a lot of excellent writers from the city. So they often choose books by writers from Dublin. In addition to teaching at the Literature and Cultural Studies department at my university, I'm also the director of a research center in my faculty, which is called the Center for Popular Culture in the Humanities. I wanted to do this project. Hong Kong, of course, does not have a One City, One Book program, but I thought it would be, a fun thing to do. So I applied for some funding along with another colleague of mine who co-directed the project, Dr. Jeffrey Clapp. And we got the money. We got quite a bit of money, actually, and we launched the One City One Book project in 2019, and we chose The Arrival. We got in touch with Shaun, and he was incredibly generous and sent us, he couldn't come. I hope he doesn't mind me saying this, but he and his wife were expecting a child at the time. So, we wanted to invite him for the opening event, but of course, understandably, he was not able to come. So he sent us this 9-minute long video recorded, as you can see, in the studio from which he was speaking to us today, kind of talking about The Arrival and doing this fantastic drawing of the creature for us, which is one of my dearest possessions. It's right up here on my office wall, and writing his name, sort of hello in Chinese. So that was really fantastic. And he also, I'll get to that in a second, but I have a few slides kind of talking about the book, but maybe you're all very familiar with the book and I don't need to do that. Sort of talking about, the story. But I have a quotation here from Shaun himself, where I think he, sort of summarizes the experience of reading the book very beautifully. So I included that. One of the great powers of storytelling is that it invites us to walk in other people's shoes for a while, but perhaps even more importantly, it invites us to contemplate our own shoes also. We might do well to think of ourselves as possible strangers in our own strange land. What conclusions we draw from this are unlikely to be easily summarized. All the more reason to think further on the connections between people and places and what we might mean when we talk about belonging. I'm just, maybe I won't kind of go through the book chronologically, but just share a few images that are, kind of favorites of mine. So this, of course, is from the, it's the first page, this kind of grid of 9 images of objects, just, ordinary domestic objects, and a family photograph, a suitcase, a hat, a clock. And then, of course, the kitchen scene, where it becomes evident that the man is leaving, and the sort of dragon-like creature suggesting the danger he might be fleeing from, and then the man getting on the ship and sailing for a long time, arriving in the new land, finding a home, finding the creature. The creature, we talked a little bit about it in the first session. A favorite of mine, and then encountering other people. And something that I really like, and a lot of people have said this to me as well, is that the protagonist, the strange land he arrives in, it is a strange place and everything is very unfamiliar, but everyone is very nice. Nothing terrible happens to the man, and everyone else also seems to be from elsewhere and sort of fleeing, war and persecution, and things like that. So this is a particularly nice scene. And then, of course, you have this beautiful kind of subtle transformation of these images towards the end of the book, where you have a similar 9 objects, which are now, the things that the protagonist and his family, they use in the new country. And some of them, of course, are unchanged, the hat and the family photograph. So, and then the last image on the right is also a favorite. I love that, the girl that both the characters on the page are women, and the girl is, it has a sense of sort of paying it forward, right? She's giving directions to a sort of newly arrived migrant. So why did we choose the arrival? I'm going to be very honest with you. We have done One City, One Book. We did it again in 2020 with a book by a local author. We suspended it in 2021 because of the pandemic. We're hoping to start it up again next year. And now we have in place, we have an advisory board, and we open it up. We open up the process. We kind of take suggestions from people in Hong Kong, just the general public. And then we make a short list and we give it to our advisory board, and then they choose a book, okay? But since this was the first year, we didn't have this sort of mechanism in place. And since I was the director and The Arrival is one of my favorite books, it ended up being The Arrival. It was literally decided between me and the co-director, my colleague Jeff, and we decided that we would do this. I have been studying the book for a long time. I've published a couple of academic articles. I'm a literary studies scholar myself. So I've published a couple of academic articles, and very briefly, I don't want to bore you with this, but just to give you a sense of what they were about. The first one is called Creating a Well-Fitted Habitus, Material Culture, Homemaking, and Diasporic Belonging in Shaun Tan's The Arrival. So here, going back to that sort of the two pages of these images, one at the very beginning and one towards the end. I was very intrigued by that and wanted to write about that. So I sort of used theories of material culture and identity formation, and kind of brought those together and talked about the different objects in the book, some from his home country and some that are very unfamiliar to him and strange to him in the new country, and the process of sort of domesticating those objects in a sense and familiarizing himself with the alien objects he encounters, and furnishing his home with these objects alongside the familiar ones from home, and how that allows him to construct his sort of immigrant identity within the space of this new nation. And then the second one was about the creature, which I'm kind of constantly fascinated by. And the relationship between the creature and the protagonist. This one is called Kinship Between Companion Species, a posthuman refiguration of the immigrant condition in Shaun Tan's The Arrival. The article explores the implications of this sort of, so instead of presenting the kind of traditional native versus immigrant framework, which we get in a lot of migration stories, he chooses to delineate this sort of interspecies relationship between, the immigrant man and a native animal. And I was interested in exploring the implications of this relationship in the age of the Anthropocene, where the privileged anthropocentrism of Western humanism has been replaced by kind of a more sort of egalitarian notion of species. So I used Donna Haraway's idea of companion species, and also Rosie Braidotti's concept of the posthuman, to kind of bring together posthumanism and postcolonial studies in this book, and so kind of studying the reconfiguration of otherness in the face of incommensurable difference, and what that means for sort of diasporic thought. So those are kind of a very quick summary of my articles. And then, of course, there are, many other very good reasons for choosing this book. These are a couple of quotations from our sort of guest book that we had at one of the exhibitions. I think this is, I mean, of course, you've heard this over and over again, and Shaun was saying how this has kind of been the, been repeated every year since the book was published, the kind of the relevance of it, right? In our world today, and then of course the fact that the story is the story of many Hong Kongers. Many people in Hong Kong came here in the 60s. There were kind of big waves of migration in the 60s and 70s from China, from mainland China. So it resonates quite deeply with Hong Kong people, particularly people of a certain generation, not so much with, people of my students' generation, let's say, but definitely with older people. And then, of course, the fact that it's a wordless novel. I mean, you can imagine that, choosing a book for a city like Hong Kong where 3 languages are sort of spoken, and of course there are lots of people who speak only one of those languages, me for example, right? So it's English, Cantonese, and Mandarin. So it becomes a bit of a challenge to choose a book that is available, say, only in one language, because then you're kind of not giving the opportunity to a certain segment of the population, depending on what language the book is written in. So this, of course, takes care of that very, very easily, right? Because you don't need to read it. So that was another reason. And then, of course, the fact that it appeals to people of all ages. And we did, in fact, work with very young children to kind of much older people. So this is kind of an overview of the events. We began with an exhibition that was kind of the launching event in January of 2019. And then we had lots of community events, many of them focusing on refugees and migrants. We took the project into many schools, both primary and secondary schools. We conducted several visual literacy workshops, so talking about using the book in different sort of classrooms, either for language teaching or, well, the workshops were mostly for language teaching, and I'll talk more about that. And then, of course, we had, sort of literary and academic events. So here are some images from the opening launch. The person on the left is my colleague Zoran Popovsky, who curated the exhibition. He's a professor of photography and art. And on the right is myself and the co-director, Dr. Clapp. We made some beautiful postcards from the images of the book, which we were giving out at the exhibition, and then the brochure. And so I just want to mention that Shaun extremely generously sent us all of these original drawings, as well as some digital prints from the arrival. So that was really exciting. And we played, you can see in this third image here, we had his video that he had made for us kind of playing on loop, so that people could stop and listen. The exhibition ran for a week. It was extremely well attended. We also had an activity area where we asked people to draw the animal, the creature, either by observing Shaun's video of him drawing it and kind of to follow him, or just to do it, draw their own creature if they wanted. And then also some writing activities. So writing about arrivals, arriving at a new place, not necessarily a new city or country, but a new neighborhood, a new school, workplace, how that felt. And then we also provided some of the images of the book and asked them to choose one. We gave them 10 and asked them to choose one and write a sentence. So here are some of the things we got. This is the picture of the objects. I don't know if you can read the one on the right. Says, objects are hard to leave behind, not only because our memories are poured in them, but because they are an extension of our identity as well. So more images, and we put up all of the artwork. We got some really interesting ones, lots of writing, lots of really fun. We had school visits, so we had children come to the from many schools come to the exhibition. This was, so you see my colleague here again, Zoran, who's the curator. His daughter, Emma, right here, brought her class to visit. And we had some talks during the exhibition. So we this was a talk in Chinese. We invited a local children's book author and an art critic to sort of have a conversation about the book. So that was kind of the first launch event, very, very successful. And then we were quite keen to talk about to use this book to talk about refugee issues in Hong Kong. Hong Kong, unfortunately, has a rather poor record of regarding the issue of refugees. So just to give you a little kind of bit of background, there are about 14,000, which is not a very big number, of course, of pending or failed asylum seekers or torture claimants awaiting processing, adjudication, appeals, or deportation after failure to gain refugee status. And most of them are from South Asia, from Nepal, Pakistan, some from India, and 30% from Southeast Asia, and about 10% from Africa. So the rate of of these people being as substantiated is abysmal. It's 1%. So almost nobody is actually granted refugee status. Hong Kong is also not a signatory of the 1951 Refugee Convention. So this means that the UNHCR cannot process these claims. The claims are all processed by the Immigration Department, by the Hong Kong Immigration Department. So while these people are waiting for their cases to be processed, they cannot work. They're given very inadequate sort of subsidies, and the subsidies are not in cash. So 1,500 Hong Kong dollars, which is roughly the equivalent of 150 euros, is given to them as rent, and it's given directly to the landlord. And I'm sure you know about kind of, how ridiculous rents are in Hong Kong. So even a tiny, like a 300 square foot room, the rent would be about 5,000 Hong Kong dollars per month. So it's grossly inadequate. And then they're given sort of vouchers and coupons for food and travel and things like that. So they don't actually get any money. Children of refugees who are born in Hong Kong do not have the, sorry, there's a typo there, the right of abode. The cost of sending children to school and other expenses that they might incur are completely discretionary, so they may or may not get any support. And there are lots of people who have spent, 10 or even 20 years sort of in this limbo without their cases being processed. It's a very important issue. So we did want to talk about that. So we organized a number of events. We worked with this wonderful NGO called Table of Two Cities that basically, works with refugees, and they cater all of their events paying some refugee families to cook food from their country for the event. So we had this event called the Arrival, Food and Migration, talking about the inclusionary and sometimes even exclusionary aspects of food and migration and the role that food plays in negotiating interactions between migrants and hosts. And we had some Egyptian food for the event. We worked with another NGO, which is actually run by one of my colleagues here at the university, called the Hong Kong Society for Asylum Seekers and Refugees. And they do a lot of work with little children. So you can see, this was sort of a storytelling session with very, very young children. We had a number of kind of literary talks and academic talks. An academic in Hong Kong teaching at the Chinese University of Hong Kong runs a sort of reading club with refugees, and he read this book with his group, and we had some of the speakers. So in the first two photographs are from that event called Upon Arrival, Otherness, Belonging, and Hospitality. So we heard from some of the refugees about their experience of reading the book. And as you can imagine, it was exactly what we were talking about in the first panel, right? In the first session, that they identified very much with this. Translation proved to be an interesting topic as well. We had 2 or 3 events that had to do with translation. What does it mean that this book has been, quote unquote, translated into, over 20 languages? That was one of the other topics. We worked with another group called the Elder Academy, which organizes events for sort of senior citizens. This is a colleague of mine at the university. He's a poet, a creative writer, Nicholas Wong. So he had he did a session reading the book with the members of the Elder Academy. We had a visiting professor from Taiwan who gave a talk, which was really interesting. She sort of talked about, translation and migration, sort of the commonalities between them. And then something else that we did is we had a student ambassador program. So the university that I work at, it's called the Education University of Hong Kong. Our bread and butter is teacher education. So most of our students, we have other programs as well, but most of our students are training to be teachers in the Hong Kong local system, in the Hong Kong local schools. So we train, all of my students are training to be English teachers. So we trained a number of our students to be ambassadors for the program. So they, they created sort of pedagogical materials, lesson plans, and took it into a lot of these schools and, had lessons. So these are again some images from school visits that we did. All ages, primary, secondary, all ages. And then this was another kind of mini project within the bigger One City, One Book program called Learning to Read, Learning to See, using graphic novels in the English language classroom. So this was the visual literacy workshop that I was talking about. I mean, if you look on the internet, you'll see that there are, there's a huge number of a huge amount of material on using this book in classrooms, particularly a lot of it out of Australia, but also elsewhere, in history classrooms and literature classrooms and, all kinds of contexts. So we invited the woman, you see her here, her name is Esther Shaw. She's a former colleague of mine. She's an Australian woman, a primary school teacher who lived in Hong Kong and taught in the Hong Kong schools, taught English in the Hong Kong schools for many years. So she's very familiar with the local curriculum, the English curriculum, and also a big fan of the book and of Shaun's work. So she came and she did a series of workshops with teachers in the schools, with Hong Kong local teachers, and a lot of demonstration lessons in some secondary schools with the students. And created a huge amount of sort of, lesson plans and pedagogical materials for these teachers. So this is a comment from one of the teachers, one of the English teachers. Working with such rich, detailed, and intriguing images as Shaun Tan's work in The Arrival had strong benefits for me as a language teacher. The pictures hooked the students in faster than words alone could have ever hoped to match. After that, fostering the drive for a deeper analysis was easy, and students were able to reach higher order thinking tasks such as identifying connections, contrasts, and symbols, in addition to creating their own wordless stories. We had a creative writing competition. So there's something called the Hong Kong Young Readers Festival, which is sort of a literary festival for school children, for primary and secondary school children. So they invited us, and we did this creative writing competition. So we just used this one image on the right and asked the kids to send in stories, short stories. So these are some of the winners. This is the award ceremony of the creative writing competition. And then finally, we were going to have the conference in December 6th and 7th. It was all planned. Professor Candida Rifkind from Canada, who has done a lot of work on graphic novels, was going to be the keynote speaker. She was giving this talk called Arrivals and Departures, Migrant Comics in the Wake of Shaun Tan. We also invited Amy Stolz, who's the Director of Literature at the National Endowment for the Arts in America, because part of our plan was to provide some funding, provide kind of a seed grant for other cities in Asia, if they were interested, to start their own One City, One Book program. Most Asian cities do not have this program. So we were inviting, we had a call out for grant applications for people. So we thought if Amy was here, she could kind of talk more about the One City, One Book program and give some guidance. And we had a lot of proposals from speakers, but unfortunately, we had to cancel it. You probably remember there were a lot of protests towards the end of 2019 in Hong Kong. So I think people were kind of genuinely afraid. People started dropping out, and we realized that it wouldn't work. So we had to very sadly cancel it. So instead, this became our closing event, an event called Sketches and Notebooks. It was so what we did was we invited local poets to write poems in response to the arrival. And we had kind of a poetry reading session, and we sort of printed a collection of poems, a booklet. So I'm going to end today with one of the poems from that night. So this is a poem called Some by Marco Jan. I decided to include it in my slide because I wanted you to see the layout of the poem instead of just hearing it. So this is exactly how it's laid out on the page. Some, 1,000 pterodactyls take flight at once, and then there is a sky. Bleak light and the shadow of a monstrous tail meld into a badland where one man is a deserter and a million more evince an exodus. But who would stop to count the hats, the suitcases, the doors of disemboweled houses? By the rails to another land gathers a layer of ghosts, a conjoined fist, 3 hands, 15 fingers, the first 5 seconds of separation. The stones, the tracks, the skeletons of elms, then the pier. What is a voyage if it's not the persistent labor of knowing the sea through the same porthole? Above the wave play, the passenger watches the false moon, the clouds' permutations, pale strings of the easterlies, 30 sights of the sun, then he loses a month. How many new words can he learn a day when vocabulary is uncountable, like light spilt on ruffled water? How many handshakes herald a friend? How many smiles summon kindness? Oh dear. Sorry, this one line is hidden from me. So much kindness. Sorry, there's a line there that I cannot see. Look at the seams, the yokes. So many fingers point him to a bronze key, a brown door, the rusty clank of a lock. In the old haunt, 4 strangers don't make a family. In the new world, 4 souls huddling around a dinner table do. However colorful the plates are, however sweet each fruit may taste, it's the bites that count. 3 bites and a gulp of wine are good for the night, when the father will sleep with an open eye, missing the face of his star. How steadily it shines as the night prepares for tomorrow, how tomorrow promises the expanse of another sky, white and pliant, where a skein of pterodactyls spread their wings, under which people spiral. One encounter, one word, one touch, then skin on skin on skin. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Bidisha.
Yeah, I should tell you what that line is.
We were able to read it though.
Oh, you were? Okay, okay. See, for me, it says it's the screen share.
Yeah, but I think we were able to see it.
Sorry about that. Yeah, okay, good.
Thank you very much.
You're
very
welcome.
moving, very moving and impressive. It's impressive what you did over this 1 year. Wow.
We had plans for more, actually. I remember we had planned for an origami workshop,
You told me about it, yes.
Yeah, and an event with animals, but sadly, we couldn't do any of that. So.
But you did a lot, and I do have questions, but before I ask something, I would like to know if one of our participants would like to ask something. Then in this case, you can also raise your hands, or you can just write something into the chat. Tiana wrote, absolutely impressive body of work, the sheer volume and the diversity of it. True.
Thank you so much.
So far, we don't have any questions yet, so I'm gonna take advantage of this. Actually, I was wondering from the background story that you told from the situation of the refugees and asylum seekers in Hong Kong. I was wondering if you had the feeling that with the work you were doing, with the engagement you were doing, with going out with this book, doing reading groups, having an exhibition and so on, having people reading this book, did you feel that you had some kind of impact? And in general, I'm not really familiar with how the discourse is about refuge, about people who seek asylum in Hong Kong. Here in Germany, it is very controversial.
Of course, yeah. It's hard to say. I mean, obviously, you know, on a larger scale, I don't think we did. But people who came to our events did seem to sort of, you know, I also mentioned that the book appealed to the older people, but the younger people didn't necessarily sort of, you know, some would even say like, how is this relevant for Hong Kong? Or why aren't you choosing a Hong Kong book, you know, which is what we did last year, right? So, I mean, not that they didn't like the book, everybody loved the book, but we got kind of questions that we hadn't expected. We thought everybody would say, oh yeah, you know, everyone here is, or so many people here are from elsewhere, that it would have this instant appeal. But it didn't. But then when we had these events with refugees, you know, we got quite a bit of sort of positive feedback on that. And refugee issues, I mean, obviously it's, you know, 14,000 is a very small number, and you know, when you're talking about, like, say, in comparison to Germany or whatever. So it's not, it doesn't get talked about very much in Hong Kong. There are a lot of NGOs who do good work, but other than that, it's not really in the discourse. There was for a while this sort of fake refugee narrative that was very disturbing, that was kind of being propagated by some people, that these are, you know, these refugees are making false claims, and you know, they're not really refugees, right? But fortunately, that's died down now. So so yeah, probably not a big impact, I wouldn't say, but some impact, yes, I hope.
And so far there are no questions yet, so I have another one, because you said you were also working on The Arrival and reading it through through glasses of post-colonial studies and posthumanism, especially related to creatures. So I didn't ask Shaun this question before, but maybe you can give me an answer from your perspective. I was actually wondering about the creatures that each migrant gets once they migrate. Actually, when they have an apartment, when they really moved in there, when they did not really arrive, but they start the process of arriving. And each of them, everybody has a different creature. How would you read them, especially from this perspective?
Yeah, I mean, that's why I wrote the article, because I was really intrigued by this idea of, you know, I mean, I was very struck when I realized that, in fact, all of the migrants in the book have this sort of companion animal, right? And the comfort that must bring, right? And the creature, our protagonist creature, is sort of very helpful, kind of accompanies him everywhere, and is sort of this friendly animal, right? So so yeah, so I sort of wanted to kind of talk about that in this. You know, Donna Haraway has written a lot about sort of interspecies relationships, and I wanted to explore it in that context. Yeah. I think it's a great idea, you know, within the book to have this as sort of, yeah, a comfort for the migrants.
I always thought that in some kind of way, it is as if there would be a representation maybe of the own set of ideas, values, cultural backgrounds and so on that the people bring with them. It is like externalized, and then if they meet another migrant, you always see that first of all, like these animals start to interact, and it depends as if like if they get along with each other, then also the people get along. It seems like that to me.
Yeah.
Sophie, I know that you're also a huge fan of the creatures, so please go ahead, ask your question.
I am. It's not relating to the creatures. I had a separate question to like the how the entire project kind of came to be, because I think it's very impactful and it's very important. And my question more specifically is, what was your favorite part to work on? Because it was like a lot of different things with like the food and the poetry, and with the elder, like the seminar with the elder people. What was your favorite part? What did you enjoy the most?
Wow. That's really hard. Probably working with, like, listening to the migrants and their experience of reading the book. That was quite moving. And also children, children were, I mean, a lot of them were puzzled, confused, but then that activity area we had was delightful, seeing people drawing their creatures or writing about arriving. We have a lot of students who come from mainland China, and they wrote about their experience of kind of arriving in Hong Kong, which was interesting. So yeah, I think those were some of the highlights. The exhibition, definitely, it was really good. And then going into the classrooms with the book was also, I mean, as I said, visual literacy is not really kind of mainstream in Hong Kong yet, for whatever reason. So we would have these teachers say, oh, but it's a wordless book, so how can you teach language using a wordless book? But of course, and then when they would see sort of the myriad ways in which you can do that, it was very exciting for them. So preparing those materials, training our students, that was also very, very satisfying. Thank you for your question. It's hard to pick. I know I haven't said one favorite. I've said like 4, but
it all sounds really nice. I really wish I could have been there.
Yeah, same. Me too.
Yeah.
Okay. Thank you so much, Bidisha. I think we will start. We continue to exchange about the arrival, and for now, yes, and for now, I would just really like to thank you that you were here today, that you attended, that you presented everything that you did over 2019.
Thanks for having me. Thank you.